Okay, hello class and welcome. So I am trying another thing so I can show my screen. So I'm on Microsoft Teams. I'm also recording on my camera, and if I have to, I'll put it up on YouTube like I've been doing. But welcome, I hope everybody is well. I'd love to talk with you and to see how classes are going. I'm interested to know that. But hopefully everything's going well for you. So today I thought I would cut through a lot of the crap, and I'm just going to get to what it takes to apply to graduate school. And I'm going to cover that and a few other things. And then if you have questions, of course I can, answer those for you. But what does it take to apply to a graduate program? And that's what we're going to discuss today. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this works. I'll just share this. Okay. Okay, so how do they choose you? How do graduate schools choose you? Well, there are different things you have to do when you're applying to graduate school, but most of the time the process is just the same, and that's whether you're going to graduate school to be a doctor or for behavioral science student. It really doesn't matter. If you're going to med school, of course you got some prerequisite courses, and that may be true for you too. You need to check with your school to see, do they have prerequisite courses that I need to take? For instance, I know the MSW program at the U, you have to take a history course. You have to take, and that history course has to be pretty current, well, within the last 10 years. And now any discrepancies that you have, so if you're like, well, I started school a long time ago and I took a break and then I came back and my history class is close to expiring or maybe it's been 10 plus years. Any discrepancies you have is a good time to call that program up and then to ask them, hey, I took this class at Weber State. It's history 1700. I took it over 10 years ago. I know that's a requirement, but can you look into that for me? And they will, and they'll let you know whether that's going to work or not. Now, same thing with contacting employers. Anytime you're in any contact with anyone, and can you network your way into graduate school? Sure, you can. But anytime you're having contact with schools, whether it be by email, face-to-face, or you're on a phone call or whatever, be polite, be kind, make sure that it's a good interaction with them. So keep those types of things in mind. But can you call them, and any discrepancies that you have, you need to talk to that school, because they're the only one that can answer that for you. So there's some objective criteria, as you'll see on your screen, and I'm on slide 38 of the grad school PowerPoint. There's some objective criteria, and that just means things that have numbers attached to them, where your transcripts, they can look at your classes, they can look at what you made in certain classes, they can take a look at your GPA. There's a number attached to that, and we'll talk about GPA just here in a couple minutes, and then we'll actually go and calculate your GPA, I think, this week. There may be an entrance exam. For most of our students, it's going to be the GRE, and that's the graduate record exam, and that will have a number attached to it. And of course, the better you do on that, the better it will do in helping them to choose you into their program. Was your application on time? And things like that. So there's some objective things they look at, and then there's some non-objective things where there's no total, a number attached to that, and that's letters of recommendation, your admission essays, those types of things. Okay, so most standard applications. So what does it take to apply and get into graduate school? So there is an application form itself, and it can be pretty in depth. You're not just going to apply to a program. First, you have to get accepted to the school that you're going to. Um, so you have to apply to that program, and that application is not something that's just going to take you 5 minutes to fill out. It's very in depth. It's going to take you a little bit of time. So you need to start on that. When you have some time, and can you come back to things? So if you got a phone call, or it took longer than you thought it would, you could always save and come back to it. And most things today are online, so you'll create, and that's how some of you might not have this past weekend known what the admission essay is. Sometimes you have to start applying to the program. You have to apply to be able to see what your prompt is, and those types of things. But you will get assigned a student ID number. You'll fill out that application. It's a lot of information that they're going to be asking you. So that application itself takes time and it takes some effort, but you can always pause it. You can save what you've got. You can open it back up. You can come back in and start working on things. So I would recommend that you write down your password that you used and know how to log in quickly and easily. So when you start that process, make sure that you're writing everything down, what your password is, so that you can easily come back in and get back to that once you get started. So you'll have to send in transcripts. Okay. So that program is going to want to know transcripts from every program that you've attended. Like for me, that was from 5 different universities. And that's if your high school, if you took AP credit or college credit in your high school classes, you'll have to go back to your high school, or go to a clearinghouse and get those classes from whatever school you did that to. And you're gonna have to turn in official transcripts from every school that you've attended, and that takes a little bit of time. These days, it's the mailing part of it is taken out of the equation, but my first school that I ever went to was Georgia Southern University, and I didn't remember my ID number. I had to call the admissions office. I had to use my social security number for them to look me up. It was a process. So, and each one of those things will cost money. So 5 different schools, that was anywhere from $5 to $20 per transcript. So there's a fee to that, and you'll have to turn those in. And if you're the type of student where you're like, well, I went to Snow College my first semester and I bombed, I don't want to turn those in. Well, you have to. So you're not going to be able to hide those. There is a clearinghouse that they can go to and pull your transcripts. And if they find out that you lied or that you didn't turn in everything, that's not going to look good upon you. And don't worry about some of those classes. And the schools that will look at you, they're going to be most interested in your last 60 credits. So it takes 120 credits to graduate college. I graduated with 190 plus credits because I switched schools multiple times. I changed majors multiple times. I took classes that didn't count. I had to retake classes. There was all that. So I was not a perfect student by any means. And my first few years, I've told you guys, I floundered. I didn't do well. And that's where you need to make sure that you are doing well in your major courses. So if you're a psychology student or you're a family science student, make sure you're doing well in those classes, because they're going to look at those. They want to see how well you did in those classes, and that's what's going to matter most to them. So, don't be afraid to turn in your first couple semesters till you figured out how to be a successful student. And if you're like me, until I found my major, that's when I really got focused in and I started doing really well as a student. So official transcripts, your GPA. Now, all these things that I'm talking about are standard to applying, just because you are a 4.0 student, you went through school and you have a 4.0 GPA, that does not automatically mean that you're going to get in to whatever graduate program that you want to get into. GPA is just one piece to the puzzle, and that's something to keep in mind. In fact, I've heard some programs say, we don't want the 4.0 students. We don't want the perfect students that, that are going to fall apart if they don't make their 4.0 or their straight A's. But I'll tell you this, a 3.5 or higher puts you in the ball game. It makes you really competitive. And of course, the higher you go, the better. So consider a 3.5 or higher will make you a really good, attractive candidate for them. Now, most schools their requirements are a 3.0 or higher. Yes, that's their requirements. But if you ask them, what was your average GPA of your last class that you accepted in, it's going to be, like a 3.78 or something. Because they take a little bit of a range, and it does, it's not just your GPA, it's what you've done in school. What type of experience do you have? Do you have research experience? What extracurriculars have you done? So GPA, I've come to school, I've made a 4.0, but you didn't take time to get to know your professors. You don't have strong letters of recommendations. Just because you have a 4.0 may not be it's not the magic key that gets you into graduate school, and that's something to keep in mind. We're going to calculate GPAs. We're going to have a class about that. That's coming up, so we'll put a pin in that and come back to it. But yeah, 3.5 or higher is kind of where you want to shoot for. Letters of recommendations. So when I talk to students and talk about letters of recommendation, a couple things come to mind. Behavioral science professors will say to most students that ask them to write, students to write them a letter of recommendation. Well, how many classes have you taken from me? Or how have we interacted? First off, you need to network with your professors. You need to know them. They need to know you by name. The people that wrote my letters of recommendations, I had done research with one. They came to me and asked me to do research with them. I did well in their class. I interacted in their class. I wasn't just a student that sat back and got my A and, left. I spoke with that professor before or after class. I did really well in their class. I raised my hand. I participated in class. And by the end of class, I was a good enough student that they were like, well, hey, I'm starting this research. Would you be interested in helping me out? And I said, well, I don't know. Let me ask my wife. Let me see if we can make it work. And, she said, yes, you're going to do that. We'll make time for it. We'll make it work. So that was one of mine. And that was a professor that I was kind of a mentor to me. I did multiple classes from him. I did multiple research assignments with him. He got me started on my own research, really nurtured me and took me in, and that's the type of relationship I had with that professor. My other was my social work professor, and let me back up a minute. That professor that wrote that letter, one of my letters of recommendation, was not even a professor from behavioral science. He is an SLSS instructor, and so not even from my own field. Now here's the thing too for you to consider as a student. A full professor with a PhD that teaches for UVU is a better choice than an adjunct professor that maybe teaches a class or two, that maybe doesn't, because maybe they do or don't have a PhD behind their name. There are adjunct professors that do. I'm an adjunct professor, but I just have a master's degree. I don't have a PhD. So there's kind of a good, better, best in that too. So get to know who the full professors are, the ones that teach at UVU, the ones that can do research, the ones that can have TAs, teacher assistants in their classes, um, and make sure that you professors get to know who you are. My other professor was my social work professor. I had multiple conversations with her. I was in her office, not all the time. I didn't bug these people, but she knew what I wanted to do. She knew me as a person. I had these people's cell phone numbers. I could call or text them, which I didn't a whole lot, but that's the type of relationship. A good recommendation letter can really put you over the top, and get you into a graduate program. So when we talk about networking, you need to get to know your professors. You need to network with them. You need to speak with them before or after class. You need to speak with them in their office hours. You need to interact with them, outside of class if you can. You need to take multiple classes from them, because there really are some professors at UVU that will not write a letter of recommendation if you have not taken 2 or more classes from them, and that is the truth. So recommendation letters, they are really important. And when you ask them, because I knew my people really well, but it was still nerve-wracking, and it was kind of awkward for me to ask them to write a letter of recommendation. But here's a couple things to keep in mind. You need to ask multiple people, and your letters of recommendations, you're going to need anywhere from 2 to 5 letter of recommendations. Sometimes they're specific. They may say, we want 2 from professors and 1 from the place you've done your practicum or your internship, and we need 1 from, they'll specify on those things. But somewhere you work, a boss can really say good things about you. Somewhere you've done an internship, or you've worked at part-time, those are people that can write those. But you want to make sure, if they say, let's use 3 for example, it would be good to get 2 academic, unless they specify, 2 academics, and then 1 from like a work or an internship type of experience. So, but it was still difficult for me to go up and ask those people, but you have to. You want to give them time. So if you're applying this fall, is it too early to ask them now? Absolutely not. And of course, you don't want to ask them a week or 2 weeks before. Your professors are very busy. You can ask them, months in advance, and the more the merrier. If you ask them 6 months in advance, they're going to appreciate you a lot more. So keep that in mind. What can you give them? If you gave them a copy of your resume or CV, if you gave them a copy of your admission essay, they could read that over and they could see what your goals and things are. The more they know about you, and the more they know you, the better letter recommendation they can write for you. So you want to keep those things in mind. Now, if you're planning on taking some time off from school, maybe you can't go to graduate school right now, maybe you're going in a year, or maybe you're going in 2 years or 5 years, it's not good to get them to write that letter of recommendation now. But what you can do is keep in touch with them. You've got to, keep up with them every once in a while. You've got to shoot them an email, or you come by and see them, interact with them. You don't want to contact them in 2 years and they say, who are you again? And that happens because professors are really busy. So you may have to, keep in touch with them. You may have to remind them who you are and say, remember I took you for, FAMS 4500 and I did this internship, and, you kind of jog their memory a little bit. Okay, now your bosses and people that you've worked at, again, keep in touch with them. And that's why it's so important for you to go in and do a good job at your work and do a good job on your internship, because you're not only representing the university, you're representing yourself. And we talked earlier about internships, and they don't pay a lot. A lot of times in behavioral science, they don't pay at all. But a letter of recommendation, it may turn into a position, a reference letter, for another position. All of those good things can come out of internships, and those are the perfect type of people, especially if it's something human services where it gives you really good experience going into your master's degree in that. They can say a lot about you, and it gives you that experience that those graduate programs are looking for. So do the best in those things that you can. Okay, I think that covers letters of recommendation really good. But of course, if you guys have any questions about that, just let me know. Okay, there's admission essays. And admission essays, again, it's one piece of the puzzle, and it can be very important too. Again, you've done that hopefully this weekend. That's kind of a writing sample to them. It lets them know why you want to go to their program. It lets them know why you chose their school, and then you make them feel like they're your number one. And you want to talk about your goals and things. What is this graduate program going to get you to eventually? So admission essays, really important, and they are standard. They are part of the process. Sometimes published papers in that, schools can request those or require those, so that's not out of the ordinary. But an admission essay is usually part of the process. And then there's a resume or a CV, a curriculum vitae. And we're going to talk about CVs on another day. Sometimes there's some choice. They say, we need to see either your resume or your CV. And if that is the case, most of the time a resume works better, just because students struggle to fill out a CV. It doesn't look as impressive on paper. And even if you use a 2-page resume, usually that's better than a 2.5-page CV. So if you have any choice, usually a resume works a little bit better, but sometimes you're going to have to write a CV. And I don't have you guys write a CV, but we're going to go over it in another class period. So that'll be in a day to come. But that is part of the process. And in your resume and CV, what sets you apart in graduate school is changing it rather from work and showing your work experience, which you still want to do a little bit, but what are your extracurricular activities? Let me go to this next slide. Well, maybe it was the one before. This other, what type of special projects have you done? Have you been in any honors courses? Have you done any research, publications, presentations? Are you part of the club in your school? Of course, you want to have relevant experience in the field that they can choose from. It's just showing more of the academic things that you've done. What relevant classes have you taken that may be important to them? So a resume for graduate school is going to be a little bit different than a resume for work experience. So, but usually that is a requirement. They want to see what you've done outside of school. They want to see what you're doing at the time. Now, there may be an interview. It's not really standard. If you're in a PhD psychology program, or most PhD programs, you can pretty much expect an interview, but it's usually not part of the process. And just keep in mind the Career Development Center if you need to prep for a graduate school interview, because you do want to practice that, and it is a big deal. And those can go different ways. I had a friend that just did one of those, and of course with the COVID-19 going on, it turned out to be online instead of in person, which that can be standard. If you live here and you're applying to a program in Nebraska, they're probably not going to fly you in, although some programs do, so that's not uncommon. And it may be good. Yeah, it's an extra expense, but it's nice to fly in and tour the city and see, kind of what you're doing, what you're dealing with. Of course, you can Google those things, but what types of schools they have, libraries, what's there to do outside of school. All that's kind of nice. So flying in for an interview, or it may be a phone interview. It could be, via Skype or some type of technology like that. So, but commonly, interviews aren't really part of the process. Now, if programs are on the fence about you, so if they're like, well, we like, we've got our 15 set aside, but we've got a spot for one more, and we like these three people, well, let's bring them in for an interview. They're splitting hairs. Sometimes that does happen, but most of the time, most of you probably won't do an interview. Okay, so you've got to think about a cost to apply. Of course, there's the cost to apply, and usually, anywhere from $50 to $100 to apply to that program, to start that application process. So, you do have to save up some money to do this. There's expense with, and a lot of times if you do fly in, they're not flying you out. You're going to pay for that. So if there is an interview and you have to fly out, that'll be something that you'll be expected to pay. Each transcript. So each transcript. So if if you're like me and you applied, or you attended 5 schools and you apply to 5 programs, you're going to have to order transcripts for each one, from each 5 schools to each 5 of those programs. So there is a cost with applying to graduate school, and you need to keep that in mind. Let's see, what else do I want to say with that? So start saving now. Maybe put, if you're going to school in the summer or the fall, start putting some money, maybe some of that student financial aid money aside, or start saving for that. You have to plan for that expense, and then it is time consuming too. For those of our BSW students that applied to the Bachelor of Social Work program this semester, they know, and it's going to be a little bit more detailed when you're applying to graduate school, but it's a lot more work on top of whatever else you're doing. So I knew that I was applying in the fall, so I, planned ahead. I looked at my schedule. I planned certain classes. I tried to make it an easier or a lighter schedule for that semester, because it is taxing. It's like I used to tell students as an academic advisor, if you're getting married that semester, or there's some big life event that's coming up, or you're applying to graduate school, like it is more to your semester. And not everyone does well with it. Sometimes things will suffer because they're applying to graduate school. So it's either going to be family, grades, money, whatever that is for you. So you have to think of it. It's going to be an extra thing, an extra duty that you'll have on top of everything else. So you have to plan for not only money, but you have to plan on, this is going to be stressful. It's going to take a lot out of you, and the people that are helping you. And here's the thing I didn't mention about letters of recommendation. If you're applying to 10 schools, and that's what a lot of, especially for psychology, professors will tell you to apply to 10 or more schools, because you need to spread it out, and you're hoping for just one to accept you in, or multiple where you have some choice in where you go. But don't be afraid to ask those professors to write you 10 letters of recommendations. For one, they've done it before. They've helped students out. They love helping students out. And here's the thing. Schools don't say, here's what we want you to write about. They leave it pretty open for them. And they can, if they're writing it at 10 different schools, they're changing up some of the details. They're not recreating and writing a new, fresh letter of a recommendation for each program, but they are changing it up and making it specific to some programs. So don't think that you're taxing them with writing so many admission essays. And then you want to let them know when to expect it. Hey, I've just applied for this school. Be checking your email. the University of Utah is going to send you an email about writing my letter of recommendation. And then you're going to have to stay in touch with them and say, did you get that? Did you check your spam? Because sometimes it kicks to there. Oh, you didn't? Well, let me check with the school. Let me get them to resend that. And then also, one thing you'll have to do for these professors is gentle reminders. And that's why you ask them ahead of time and you give them as much time to write it and all the information they need. And then you'll have to just say, hey, Professor Draper, that, the application's coming up. My letter of recommendation is going to be due at this time. I just wanted to see how that was coming. Wanted to give you kind of a reminder about that. You're going to have to prod and poke them sometimes because those types of things will happen. Okay. Now, you're coming across on paper. So everything that you turn in that you have any control over, you want it to look its best. So you're going to turn in things in PDFs. That way nothing changes. And you kind of have a checklist. You'll see when things get checked off. Yes, you've turned in your application. That's done. That's checked off. Now you're going to need your transcripts and the letters, recommendations, and blah blah blah. Keep up with that. If you've got multiple irons in the fire, you want to stay as organized as possible, and know what you've sent. What you're going to send everything in a PDF, or if they say we'll accept unofficial transcripts, well, you make sure that they look as good as possible. Anything that you have control over, the quality that you turn in, you want to make sure it's as good as possible. And you're turning in PDFs so that that they are getting what you want them to see, and it hasn't changed its format, and they can't play around with anything either. So those are all things to consider as you're turning it in. And these things, all of these steps, there's the application, the transcripts, your calculation of GPA, which you're not calculating that unless you have it on your, they're going to calculate that from your transcripts, or you could calculate it and have it on your CV or resume. But your letters of recommendation need to be good quality. And one more thing about letters of recommendations, most schools will say, you're going to check a box that what does it say? You haven't seen the letters of recommendations, or you have seen them. You want to check the box off that you have not seen your letters of recommendations. You want them to be straight from that person, unaffected, untouched, their opinion, not doctored in any way. Now, if you've got a good enough relationship from the people writing your letters of recommendations where you say, if you don't mind, would you send me a copy of that to my email? You need to send it to these schools or whatever, but do you mind sending me a copy of that? And if they're okay with that, that's fine. But schools want you to check that you have not seen those letters of recommendations. You don't have any effect on how those come out. So that's something to keep in mind too. Your admission essays, you've got great control over that, and you want that to look as good as possible. And again, you're following specific instructions on those admission essays. You're following whatever they say to a T. You make sure you're covering whatever content they want you to cover. You make sure it's a certain length, certain font, whatever they want. You make sure that you cover that. Okay. Letters of recommendation. So you want those to come with faculty you've worked closely with, that you worked with, on the side, you've done multiple things with. You want them to be able to speak on your work habits, writing, speaking skills, personal characteristics, intelligence, aptitude for academic success, leadership skills, etc. You don't want to ask family members or ecclesiastical leaders to write those. Now, there are programs out there, religious schools and things, that you will have to have an ecclesiastical endorsement, and you'll handle that on your own. But or you don't want those to come from family members or your therapist or ecclesiastical leaders. That's a do not, that you don't want to ask those people. Um, let's see. You want to give them plenty of time so they can start thinking about it and have plenty of time to write those. And then again, give those kind of gentle reminders and ask them, is there anything you need from me that would help you be able to write this letter of recommendation? And then afterwards, you make sure that you write them a thank you note, and then keep in touch with them. Those professors are willing to write those for you. They want to see or know what programs you got into and which one that you are, eventually attending. So make sure that you don't just drop off the face of the earth after they've written you this letter of recommendation. Make sure you thank them and make sure that you let them know where you're attending. Okay, I think I'm going to call that for today. That is the steps, the application process. Kind of in a nutshell. We're going to cover CVs on another day. We're going to talk about GRE. But if you guys have any questions about the steps to applying for graduate school, make sure you email me, and hopefully we could talk about those the next time we get on. And we're going to call it a day, and I'll get back with you either, tomorrow or Thursday. My days are running together. I'm sure yours are too. We'll get back together either Wednesday or definitely by Thursday, covering what's due this weekend, and make sure you're up to date on that. You guys have a great week. We'll talk to you. We'll talk to you later. Hope you guys have a great week and a great night. Thanks.